Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to our next session of Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. As you know, we last finished the summer of the 16th year of the war, which dealt with the crisis at Melos, the Milesian dialogue, where Melos was an island's colony of the Spartans that was kind of out in the ocean. It's an island that therefore were kind of neutral. They didn't side with the Spartans, but now the fact that they're there and what they are, they're a potential Spartan ally, and us, the Athenians thought to stop it, make it secure, and put it under their control. Couldn't risk. In other words, already they feel that it was too much of a risk letting them be neutral at that stage. It was a big, they're basically outnumbered. It's clear instead they decided to put their faith in the Spartans, uh, and that's where we ended off in that sense. This now with the winter of this again, we're using Landmark Thucydides edition, Crawley translation. We're using Google Books and the thing, and we're finishing the last chapter of book 5, and then turning the rest of the. This is weird. This is where the ending of the Thucydides becomes a little less organized. And even though he's written, I mean, he dies before finishing the book. He lived to see the end of the war, and he, in fact, he even mentions that in an earlier chapter that he saw the ending of the war. But earlier books, earlier parts of the book. But now what's happening is he didn't finish the book in that sense, and we're getting to the most interesting part. This is when we get to the Melian dialogue, which is famous, and now we're getting to this point of the question of the Argives, and the Spartans and the activity in the Argive area. So let's look at chapter 115 of book 5, which is actually 116, which wraps up the 15, where he talks about the Corinthians and like things that took measures over the summer was over, the end of summer. 16 is that starts out with the beginning of the thing. The Milesians sally out by night successfully, so therefore they're resisting in a little bit. The next thing is the next winter, the Spartans intended to invade Argive territory, but arriving at the frontier found that sacrifices for crossing unfavorable and went back again. The attempt of theirs made the Argives suspicious of certain of their fellow citizens, some of whom they arrested, others, however, escaped them. About the same time, the Milesians took again another part of the Athenian lines, which were but feebly garrisoned. Reinforcements afterwards arriving from Athens in consequence, under the command of Philocrates, son of Demeas. The siege would now proceeded more vigorously, and some treachery taking place inside. The Milesians surrendered at the discretion to the Athenians, who put to death all grown men whom they took, sold the women and children as slaves, and subsequently sent out 500 colonists and settled the place themselves. And here ends book 5. And now we turn to book 6, the beginning of book 6, which remains to the west of this. The same winter, the Athenians resolved to set sail to Sicily with a greater armament than was under Laches and Euthymeron, and if possible to conquer the island, most of them being ignorant of its size and the number of its inhabitants. The Hellenistic and barbarians, and the fact that they were undertaking a war not so much inferior to that against the Peloponnese. For the voyage around Sicily in a merchant vessel is not far short of 8 days, and yet an island, as large as that island is, there's only 2 miles of sea to prevent it being in the mainland. It was settled originally. It was settled originally as followed, and the peoples that occupied it are these: the earliest inhabitants spoken of, and the early part are the Cyclopses and Cyclopses and the Lastrigones, but I cannot tell you what race they were, or from where they came of, or where they went, but must leave my reader to the poets, to what the poets have said of them, and to what may generally be known concerning them. The Slanaceans appeared to have been the next settlers. The Syacanians, Sicanians appear to be the next settlers, although they pretend to have been the first of all an aboriginal, but the facts show that they were Iberians driven by the Ligurians from the river Syracuse in Iberia. It was from them that the island was before called Trinacaria and took its name Cicerena, and is today they inhabit the west of Sicily. On the fall of Ilium, some of the Trojans escaped from the Archaeans. Some came in ship to Sicily and settled next to the Ciceranians, under the general name of Umai, their cities being called Erexus and Gistia. With them settled some of the Phoenicians carried on the way from Troy by storm, first to Libya, and then afterwards from there to Sicily. The Sicils crossed over to Sicily from their first home in Italy, freeing from the Oppians, 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 as tradition says, and as seen not unlikely, upon rafts, having watched till the wind steadied down the strait to make passage, although perhaps they may have sailed over in some other way. Even at the present day, there are still Sicilians in Italy, and the country gets its name of Italy from the king of the Sicils, called Italus. Italus. These went with a great host to Sicily, defeated the Sicanians in a battle, and forced them to withdraw to the south and the west of the island, which thus came to be called Sicily instead of Sicania. After they crossed over and continued to enjoy the richest part of the countries for nearly 300 years before any Hellenes came to Sicily. Indeed, they still hold the center and north of the island. There was also the Phoenicians who held promontories upon the seacoast, a nearby island, for the purposes of trading with the Sicils. But when the Hellenists began to arrive in considerable numbers by sea, the Phoenicians abandoned most of their stations, and drawing together took up their abode in Mortia, Solois, and Panormus near the Ulmi, partly because they trusted in their alliance with them, and because these are the nearest ports for the voyage between Carthage and Sicily. These were the barbarians in Sicily. These were the barbarians in Sicily, settled as I have said. This is where they settled. He said. Of the Hellenes, the first to arrive were the Clinicians from Uboya, and with Thaucles and their founder. They founded Naxos and built the altar of the Apollo Archigates. which now stands outside the city and upon which the deputies for the game sacrificed before sailing from Sicily. Syracuse was founded the year after by the Archeans, and one of the Heliclids from Corinth, who began by driving out the Sicels from the island upon which the inner city now stands. Though it is no longer surrounded by water, over time the outer city was also enclosed within the walls and became populous. Meanwhile, Thoricles and the Clydatians set out from Naxos in the 50th year after the foundation of Syracuse, and drove out the Sicels by arms and founded Leonati. No, sorry about that. I had to stop for a second to answer, deal with the phone call. Um, in fact, I should have. So let me repeat that. He says, he talked about how this is at chapter 3 of book 6. Meanwhile, Theracles and the Chaldeans set out from Naxos 50 year and foundation of Syracuse and drove out the Sicels by arms and founded Leonade, afterwards Cantana, and then the Cantanians themselves chose Navarus as their founder. At the same time, Lamus arrived in Sicily from the colony of Megria. He founded a place called Trotilus beyond the river Pantactia, chaos, and afterwards left it, and for a short while joined the Chaldeans at Leonadae, but were driven out by them and founded Thrapus. After his death, his companions were driven out of Thrapus and founded a place called the Hebelian Megara. The Hebalans, a Sicel king, having given up the place and inviting them there. Here they lived for 245 years, after which they were expelled from the city and the country by the Syracusan tyrant Gilon. Before their expulsion, however, 100 years after they had settled there, they sent out Pamellus and established Silenus, he having come from the mother country, Megria, to join them in their foundation. Gley was founded by the founded by Antiphemos from Rhodes and Entemos from Crete, who joined in leading a colony there in the 45th year after the foundation of Syracuse. The city took its name from the river Glinas, and the place from which first fortified, where the city now stands, he called Ladinae. The institutions which they adopted were Dorian. Nearly 180 years after the foundation of Glea, the Glenoians founded Cregas, Agridiatinium, also called from the river from that name, and made Aristonas and Pilistilus their founders, given their own institution to the colonies. Zancles was originally founded by pirates from Cumae, and the Cladonian city in the country of the Opicans. Afterwards, however, large numbers came from Caladlis and the rest of Euboria and helped to people the place. The founders being Pirerides and Clatamenides from Cumia and Claudius, respectively. It first had the name of Zancle, given it by the Sicels, because the place was shaped like a sickle, which the Sicils called Zencon. But when the original settlers were later expelled by the Samians and other Ionians who landed in Sicily, fleeing from the Persians, and the Samnians driven out in turn not long afterwards by Anaxius, a tyrant of Ringulum, the city was by him colonized with a mixture population and changed its name to Messina, after his old country. So this is Himera was founded from Zenkel by Euclides, Simus, and Sancon. Most of these who went to the colony were Caledicians, though they were joined by some exiles from Syracuse who had been defeated in a civil war called the Metylidii. The language was a mixture of Chaldean and Doric, but the institutions which prevailed were the Chaldidian. The Arcadi and the Plasmidian were founded by the Syracusans. The Acere, 70 years after Syracuse, and Casamini, nearly 20 after Archaea. Carmenia was first founded by the Syracusans close upon 135 years after the building of Syracuse. Its founders being Drascon and Menacolonus. But after the Caramidianians were expelled by arms by the Syracusans for having revolted, Hippocrates, son of Hippocrates, tyrant of Gley, who some time later received their land and ransom from some Syracusan prisoners, resettled Campania himself as its founder. Lastly, it was depopulated by Gelon and settled once more for the third time by the people of Gley. Such were the lists of the peoples, Hellenic and barbarians inhabiting Sicily, and such a magnitude of the island which the Athenians were now best on invading, being ambitious in real truth of conquering the whole, although they had also specious designs of aiding their kindred on the other allies in the island. But they were equally incited by envoys from Aegustia, who had come to Athens and invoked their aid in more urgently than ever. The Aegustians had gone to war with their neighbors, the Seleucines, over the questions of marriage and disputed territories, and the Seleucians had procured the alliance of the Syracusans and pressed Aegustia hard by land and sea. The Aegustians now reminded the Athenians of the alliance made at the time of Laches during the former Leontian War, and begged them to send a fleet to their aid. Their main argument, among a number of other considerations urged, was that if the Syracusans were allowed to go unpunished for their depopulation of Leontii, to ruin the allies still left to Sparta and Sicily, and get the whole power of the island into their hands, they would be a danger of their one day coming with a large force of Dorians to the aid of their Dorian brethren, and as colonists, and to the aid of the Peloponnesians who sent them out, and joining these in pulling down the Athenian Empire. The Athenians would therefore do well to unite with their allies still left to them and make a stand against the Syracusans, especially as they, the Aegustians, were prepared to furnish money sufficient for the war. The Athenians, hearing these arguments constantly repeated in their assemblies, by the Aegustians and their supporters, voted first to send envoys to Aegustia to see if there were really money that they talked of in the treasury and temples, and at the same time discern the truth about the war with the Seleucinians. The envoys of the Athenians were accordingly dispatched to Sicily. That same winter, the Spartans and their allies, um, uh, uh, especially except for the Corinth, marched into the Argive territory, ravaged a small part of the land, took some yokes and oxen, and carried off some grain. They also settled the Argive exiles at Ome and left them a few soldiers taken from the rest of the army in making a truce for a certain period, according to which neither Oriente or Argives would were to injure each other's territory, return home with their army. Not long afterwards, the Athenians came with 30 ships and 600 hoplites, and the Argives, joining them with all their forces, marched out and besieged the men at Orine for one day. But the garrison escaped at night, the besiegers having captured some way off. The next day, the Argives, discovering this, razed Orine to the ground and went back again, after which the Athenians went home with their ships. Meanwhile, the Athenians took some cavalry of their own, and the Macedonian exiles that were at Athens by sea to Mythione on the Macedonia border, and plundered the countries of Plerikids. Upon this, the Spartans sent to Thrace the Thracian Chaldaeans, who had a truce with Athens from one 10-day to another, urging them to join Pericles in the war, which they refused to do. And the winter entered, and with it ended the 16th year of the war, which Thucydides was a historian. So here we end the winter of the 16th year. If you have any comments or questions, put them below. I will answer them if I see them. If you like this, like it, share it. If you have, if you want to get more of these things, subscribe and encourage others to subscribe. If you want to, you can follow me on social media. The information is again listed below. If you wish to help or contribute in some way, please look at the Patreon or the subscribe star information that's below also. Again, thank you for your time. I hope you get some benefit from this. We'll see what happens. I'm kind of, I'm surviving, in that sense, recovering. My throat, you can hear it. 3 weeks of flu was kind of tough. I'm still kind of coughing a little bit, but I'm getting better. And this, in about a couple weeks, we're going to be, no. When you see this, when this is live, we'll be a week away from the school season. Could I be a couple days away from the school season in Central Europe? We start in October, so you should be seeing this around almost at the end of September, and I'll be busy Mondays and Wednesdays. I will still try to keep a 5-day schedule. We'll be wrapping up book the Peloponnesian War, and I'm kind of flipping the coin what I'm going to do next. Well, with that, I'll say goodbye, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.